Hello, welcome to the 2022 Positioning Theory Virtual Talk Series, where we will be hearing from Luc Venlingenhove in a moment. A few announcements before we get started. I am Mary McVie, coming to you from the University at Buffalo SUNY, where preparations are underway for the 2022 Positioning Theory Conference. This will be held virtually and in person, so there are options for both. The in-person site will be at the University at Buffalo in Buffalo, New York. Registration is now open. You can visit the conference website at www.buffalo.edu/clary/positioning-theory. And that should also be on the screen for you. It usually shows up if you Google positioning theory, University of Buffalo or UB as well. So at this point, I will turn to today's speaker, Dr. Luc Venlingenhove. Luc will be talking about positioning theory as part of a general social theory. And just a brief introduction, Luc Venlingenhove is a professor at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels, where he acts as the Rector's Academic Commissioner for International Institutes and Networks. Previously, he has been founding director of the United Nations University Institute of Comparative Regional Integration Studies and Deputy Secretary General of the Belgian Federal Science Policy Office. He has worked with Rom Harré since their first joint publication from 1986, and so has been working for many decades with Rom as a collaborator. In recent years, Luc is focusing on the further development of positioning theory and upon the place of social sciences and humanities in society. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Luc Venlingenhove.
Welcome to everybody. I wanted to speak today about a general social theory that puts positioning theory in a broader context. Basically, what I want to stress is that if you really want to understand positioning theory as part of the work of Rom Harré, then you have to take into account the many other writings that he produced, especially the ones on ontology. And what I will try to do today is argue that there is only one ontology, both of the social and the psychological realm, and that the social and the psychological are actually two sides of the same coin. So this means that we cannot separate from each other the social and the psychological. Although from an epistemological point of view, from an analytical point of view, we have to do that from time to time. So I realize this is an ambitious project. So let me further say something about how this is going to happen. Well, first of all, the reason why I'm spending some time and some energy on this is because I truly believe that the social sciences need more theory. And this is related to an observation that has been made by many by now, that is that in recent decades, theorizing has been downplayed in many social sciences publications. And there is a tendency to focus on data, which is good, of course, in the sense that we need empirical research, but to understand, to make interpretations of the research, we need much more theory. I also believe that we need better theories in the sense that I have the feeling, and again, I'm not the only one with that, that many of the theories that are fashionable today in the social sciences and humanities sphere, that many of those theories are, well, let's say, rather simple and lack sophistication. And that has been one of the enduring themes of Rom Harré, that he wanted the social sciences to be much more sophisticated and in that aspect even be mirrored by what's happening in the natural sciences. And I will come back to that later on. So how I want to contribute to this ambitious task is by first trying to continue what I'm doing in last years. It is to try to formulate a systematic Rom Harré reader and to make sure that we can combine all his insights that he made. Obviously, this also implies that I take critical stance towards what Rom Harré He's not the oracle, to be sure, and we have to stay critical to some of the things he said, and even the contradictions that there are in some of his writings. Next, I want to inject this theoretical corpus with insights from other scholars to be sure that to make sure that it's possible to further develop the Rom Harré worldview, if I can call it like that. And then thirdly, I'm at this moment also engaged in trying to develop and add some new perspectives and new thinking in that corpus of Harré-inspired propositions and actually it's a whole worldview or societal view that we are in the middle of producing at this moment. What will be the end result? What is the expected end result? Well, nothing less or nothing more than just a general theory of the social real that is based upon an adequate ontology, an ontology that links persons to societies. Remember the structure-agent problem, and that finally that can be used as a framework to plug in other specific theories. So with this, I'm going to spend the rest of my talk to three issues. The first one is that I will briefly say something about the societal needs there are for more social theory. And second one, I will claim that the bulk of social theories and social theorizing exercises at the moment are not living up to societal expectations. These will be two brief statements, and then I will spend most of the time today to presenting you the elements of a general theory, just to give you a feel of what I think is possible. So begin with the societal needs for theorizing. But of course, the first thing to ask ourselves is, what are we talking about? And as you will realize, and I'm sure you know, that there are many definitions of social theory. I'm not going to open that Pandora box, but just give you one definition. It's one relatively recently formulated by Seidman in his book, that he just simply says that social theories, good social theories, are supposed to be analytical frameworks or paradigms that are used to study and make interpretations of social phenomena. And I think that's indeed the essence of what a social theory is. It should open a kind of window to reality. And in that sense, it's also a lens that focuses upon certain things. And in that way, we can say that all social theories are by necessity simplifications of reality. It's simply impossible to take into account the whole of reality. But there are gradations in that. The minimal, let's say, perspective we can develop on social theory is that we see it as a tool that helps to explain certain specific aspects of the social world. The maximalist view is that indeed we think that it is possible to go for a general social theory that brings together different perspectives, even different disciplines. I mentioned here Talcott Parsons as one example, but I could also refer to Habermas, Ulrich Beck, Giddens for sure, and many, many others. And all of these general theories do have some merits, but I believe that there is one element almost constantly missing in those endeavors, and that is to link the social with the psychological issues. And that is, again, especially what Rom Harré has contributed to this field. So, why do we need social theorizing? Well, I would say the first reason is that we have to cope with the growing complexity of the world. Tilty already formulated this imaginary, well-informed citizen, and that the citizen needs tools, hinges if you want, to understand the world as much as possible. To some extent, ideologies serve that purpose too, religion, of course, but we are talking here of social science-based, social science and humanity-based information that helps people to make sense of the whole world that surrounds them. Next is, and this is true for everybody, notwithstanding what they are doing, what their social status is, if you want to use that, term. So that's for citizens in general. Next, you have a specific type of citizens, the people that are engaged in somehow policy making. They need also frameworks to come to decisions, political decisions about what to do and what not to do. And as you know, in most cases, when you have a problem, it's, I would say, even relatively simple to try to find solutions for that problem. The issue is that if you combine different problems and solutions that you have for different problems, then that gives you a mix that becomes truly very difficult to work with and to understand. And then thirdly, you need, of course, as researchers, theories to debate the results and to make sure that researchers from different social sciences and humanity disciplines can debate and discuss their results. So the citizens, the policymakers, and the researchers are the three groups, I think, that are particularly in need of good social theories. So that can be added that we are in the middle of a process that is sometimes called big data. I call it datafication of the world, which means that almost everything can be regarded as a data point right now. And that gives you an exponential growth in data that even changes the methodology of how we are working in the social sciences. Methodology in the sense that we will use to work with, first develop your theoretical framework, then the hypothesis, and then you do the research. Now you can have computer simulations that run through your data and see what will happen at some point, what kind of hypothesis that can be formulated after you have done the data collection. And that's quite a challenge. And finally, there is also, I think, regardless of the datafication of the world, the fact that we increasingly live in a world that has all kinds of global problems, but that we realize that the problems that we are faced with are, at the end of the day, always of a social nature. Sometimes now fashionable to say that we are living in the Anthropocene, in the sense that human beings have an impact on the planet. But of course, that is not a biological problem, that is not a natural science problem. There is a dimension of natural sciences to it, to be sure, but the things that are happening, the fact that we can change it or not change behavior, that we can change production processes, etc., are at the end of the day always of a social nature. So, as you can see, there are quite a lot of needs for social theorizing, and on top of it, I truly believe that that need is growing to the extent that classical ideologies and religion are not up to delivering this kind of sense-making frameworks that people need. So there is a responsibility there from social theorists as well. But yeah, this is again an overview of what I just said. So we go to the next slide. How is social theory do it? Well, there are quite a lot of reviews available of social theories. And on the one hand, they give you the classical story that it all started with the emergence of the social sciences, and that originally social theorizing was seen as not in contradiction with, let's say, empirical or even experimental research. Think, for instance, the founding fathers of psychology, like Wilhelm Wundt. Wundt was not only the author of a book that proposed experiments and experimental rigorous methodologies, he was also the same man that produced a book on the morality of society. And that was not at all an experimental or empiricist book. So you could have both roles in those days, but gradually philosophy and the grand stories on the one hand, and social theory on that same level became detached from most of the empirical research. And it became a kind of niche that found its way mostly in departments of philosophy rather than in departments of sociology, let alone in psychology departments. And if you look at the state of the art at this moment, Well, I just gave you 2 quotes, and there are many others that could be added to that. The quote by Jeffrey Alexander is, there is a kind of abandonment of theoretical discourse in the whole social sciences and humanities. And Donald Devine points to one of the reasons when he says, who dares to try to make an academic career by writing theory? And that is quite interesting, that observation. So, but if I say that social theory is in a problematic state because it's isolated, because it's not delivering what it should deliver, the question is, what are the real down-to-earth problems that cause that situation? Well, first of all, what is quite interesting to see is that there is hardly any methodological guidance for how to write social theory. There are a couple of authors that have attempted to give some methodological guidance, but by and large, everybody who's into social theory does it in his, her proper way and just writes about it. So the act of doing the research is actually the act of writing. As I already said, on top of that is the detachment from the empirical research, and also what I would call the lack of interdisciplinarity, because in a way, you have social theorists that work in sociology, in economics, more or less a couple of them in psychology, think of Smethson, for instance, but all of these people seem to take for granted the disciplinary divides, and there is hardly anything that tries to build bridges between sociology, economics, political science, you name it. On top of it, not only the disciplinary divides are taken for granted, there is also a lack of thinking about the ontology of the social reality, which is quite amazing because we are somehow used to assuming that the ontology of the natural world should be the same, in the same way structured as the ontology of the social world. And as I will try to argue later on today, I don't think that is actually the case. Final thing is that social theory, when somebody develops a social theory, Gatens, Beck, Habermas, Harré, whoever, that seems to be, to a very large extent, a standalone effort. It's written, it's published, and then it has a life of its own at best. It is used by some people who make references to it, but you will seldom find people that try to build new insights upon what has been done already. So I still wait for instance, the first publications that will say, let's see what happens if we try to combine the Rom Harré thinking with Habermas. There was some bits and pieces available here and there, but nothing really systematic. And then the final thing that we should also add, if you have different social theories, how can you test them? And also, how can you compare them to each other? Actually, to my knowledge, there is no comparative tool available to make sure that in a systematic way, we can put next to each other different social theories and see how they deal with certain aspects of reality. By the way, this has been done a long time ago, end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, by a scholar called Madi, who has developed a kind of comparative tool to make sure that we could compare the, let's say, the structure and the content of different personality theories. And actually what I'm going to do later on is use that Madi scheme as a way to not only to think about personality and persons, but about society. More about this later. So, this is why, what, and how. But of course, when you think about an issue, you always also are guided by some kind of dream. And my dream is that we see lots of books written by very distinguished professors and scholars in natural sciences that talk about the fabric of the natural world, the natural science world, natural reality. David Deutsch is a classical one who has a very interesting book about fabric of reality. When he speaks about reality, it is, of course, the natural sciences reality, both at, let's say, the Newtonian level and at the quantum level. Brian Greene does the same, and of more recent time is the book by that's called The Nature of Reality and the Universe. What I'm dreaming about is, of course, having more or less something similar for the social world. And I think in the work of Rom Harré and the work of other scholars are enough elements today to create such stories. And once again, why do we need such stories? Because at the end of the day, we need them to give sense-making tools to people. Coming back a moment to the assessment of the social theory at this moment and the development, the need to develop new tools and new thinking about social theory. And this is a bit of a commercial at this moment. I can announce you that since a couple of weeks, the Frontiers Journal of Sociology has launched a kind of standing special issue on exactly that topic, under the title Making Social Theory Work, how bridging the gap between social sciences and humanities and social theory can increase the reflexive capacity of society. Quite a mouthful. Anyway, it's a special issue that is edited by 3 guest editors, Mo Alase, Joe Anguri, and myself. And we are at this moment accepting contributions for the journal. So if you feel that you have something to say about this domain, by all means, send in an abstract. End of the commercial. Thank you. So with this, we can start the third part of this talk. And this is actually to give you a feel of how we can build a theory of a general social theory that, of course, as I said already many times, is based primarily on the work of Rom Harré, but also of other scholars, philosophers like Wittgenstein, Austin, Searle, and many others. I'm at this moment labeling this the spoken word theory because of the centrality of conversations. And I hinted for the first time already in my 2011 book, Innovating the Social Sciences, to it. And now in the special issue that the Journal for the Theory of Social Behavior published as a tribute to Rom Harré, there is an article that where I more or less officially, if you want, introduced the topic of the spoken word theory. What are we speaking about? Well, once again, what I'm trying to do is first use the totality of the conceptual universe that has been created by Harré. And again, this also implies being critical about it. Then see if we can transform that conceptual universe in a more axiomatic presentation of the Harryan look of the social world. And I'm inspired by the work of Smetsland here, who did the same for psychology. And then the third issue is that I want to use Maddy's comparative personality theory system to actually not compare, but present the social world, the social spoken word theory. So 3 steps: the conceptual universe, the experience of trying to make it in an axiomatic system, and then 3, like to uniform the presentation models. So 4 things should be highlighted if you want to present the general social theory. First, we are talking about conversations as one of the most basic issues of how the social realm looks like. But the world is much more than conversations. We also have to take into account a specific, let's say, specific language to make sure that we can grasp all the building blocks of the social realm. In some cases, that will be straightforward, very simple definitions and uses of concepts. In other terms, in other occasions, it will be much more difficult because we are talking about things that are counterintuitive on the one hand, or that are non-observable on the other hand. Building upon that, we can say something about ontological grids. That is the way that we structure reality and that we structure the perception of reality. And there again, we can see that there is kind of a general tendency to work with one grid that makes a lot of sense. And if we look at the natural world, it is the Newtonian Humean grid. I will explain that in more detail later. But there are other grids possible, and actually not only possible, they are needed as well to understand different aspects of reality. And with all this achieved, we can turn to the issue of what is society. And basically, this means for me, where do we localize society? Where do we localize the social being? And here you will see that this is the place where I want to introduce this idea that there is a kind of two sides of the same coin issue when we talk about persons and society. So quite an agenda still, and you will understand that I will have to rush you through this whole area now. But at the end of the day, there will be more to come in the next coming months. I will come back to that as well. So, conversations, I guess most of you will be familiar with Rom Harré's thinking about conversations. His key issue is that we have to, let's say, we have to understand the social reality, the psychological reality, with the model of how a conversation is going on. So this is very important that we talk about conversations in the sense of oral expressions. It is, for instance, at this moment, it's a bit of an odd conversation that is going on. I'm speaking to you guys, you're listening to me. There is at this moment no interaction whatsoever, but still it is a conversation. And the structure of that conversation is totally different from written language. I'm not reading a paper here. I have some notes with me, but the way I structure my thinking is different as it is structured with written language. And so, according to Harré, that's one of the essential problems of the marriage between linguistics and psychological thinking, that quite often the basis of the linguistic approach is the written language that is taken as a model. And Harré says, no, it should not be the written language, but the oral expression, the conversation, in other words. The second thing that needs to be clarified here is that the notion of conversation in Rom Harré's thinking is very broad. A signpost is also a way of conversation between somebody who was responsible for adding the content to the signpost. For instance, in the room here, there is a no smoking sign signal. That means that at one point in time, there has been a meeting of the management of this institution where I am at this moment, and they decided to say, well, the smoking in the rooms should not be allowed. And so, in a sense, that signpost that you see here in my room is just repeating over and over again, you shall not smoke in your room, you shall not smoke in your room. So that is a conversation. And so there are many other examples of things that can be considered as a conversation. And the point that Rom Harré makes in quite a lot of his publications is always that that is to be seen as the primary reality of the social world. Why primary reality? Because all the rest is actually a result of builds upon that primary reality. So what we see, if you look at the world around us, next to the things that are part of the physical world, is, well, we see persons who are, of course, in a way, part of the physical world also, because we have bodies. We see all kinds of artifacts. My computer here in front of me, the pen that I'm using, the room that I'm in. I see houses at the outside. I see trees. Well, the trees are not artifacts, no, but they are trees in a garden. And the garden is actually being designed in a certain way. It looks very much like an English garden. So in that sense, the tree is part of an artifact as well. And then you have something that we call institutions, like for instance, the university is an institution. And yes, on the one hand, you have the bricks and the buildings that we see of the university buildings. To be sure, that's a reference to the natural world. But then there is something else, and that is the whole thing that is going on within the university, but it is not really confined to the buildings. We could at one point say that we're going to lecture outside in the garden, or we're going to do a lecture as a kind of webinar. And I'm now at this moment not at the university, but still I'm playing my role as university teacher. So the institution is somewhere in between the visible natural world on the one hand and a more invisible social world on the other hand. And that brings me to the last aspect of the secondary reality. And secondary means that everything which is listed on the left side there is a result of conversations. So persons are human beings that have been taken up in series of conversations from the moment they are actually conceived and they start to play a role in the life of their parents. Artifacts are the products of human actions, of course, but that human action is always related to intentions that people have, intentions that can be negotiated with others. The same for institutions. Institutions are not given, they are created by people. And then you have the two final arrangements. That is that we all live in a kind of invisible field of knowledge that we have to our disposal to do things, and moral orders that give us guidance to what we should do and what we could do. So for instance, one of the knowledge fields that surrounds me at this moment is the knowledge that is needed to handle my computer. And as you have witnessed in the beginning of my talk, I'm not very good in that, but still with help of other people, I could mobilize some of you to help me to get more knowledge about how to do this. And this is a really very important issue, because it means that by using knowledge fields, we as human beings, we can all do much more than we could ever do if we would be on our own, so to speak. I mean, I cannot fly an airplane, I cannot build an airplane, but still I can fly from here to somewhere else on the planet. I can only do that because there are knowledge fields of people that can actually use all kinds of skills and tools to replicate planes. But on top of it, there is also a knowledge field that I can tap, and that is about how to make sure that on the internet you can buy a cheap ticket or business seat or whatever, and that you need to go through the customs and embark on a certain time, etc., etc. So thanks to the knowledge fields, people can do much more than they could ever do. And this is a problem in the sense that most of the cognitive psychology that is organized today tends to focus upon individual brains. And I think to have a truly cognitive science, we should not only focus upon individual brains, but upon what I call the extended brain, because all of the things we do is only because we can constantly mobilize directly or indirectly all these other brains to do things, so to speak, for us. And then you have the moral orders, which is the fact that there are all kinds of rules and things that we should do and should not do that surround us. The one example I always like to take is that of the traffic laws. When you enter the streets, you know you have to walk on the right side or the left side, depending where you live. That when you see the red light or the green light, you can advance or not advance, etc., etc. So again, this moral orders gives you some guidance to limit the agency that we have. Instead of always walking, you have to pay if the sign tells you not to walk, etc. But these are not causal requirements, of course. It's not because there is a red light that shows you should stop that you actually have to stop. You can still choose on your own risk of getting injured or whatever, or injuring other people, that you could still choose to continue and ignore the red light. So the building blocks of society is, in Rom Harré's work, I think a very interesting but a little bit underestimated aspect if it turns to positioning theory. More about this later. Which brings me to what I already introduced a couple of times, that persons and societies at the end of the day should be seen as one thing that cannot be separated. And the reason why is because society can simply not exist without persons. And persons cannot exist without society, at least persons in the sense that we have in a society as complex as ours, that we are dependent upon the work and the endeavors of so many others. So we have persons as powerful agents within society, and in society we have agencies that come from society, but always through persons that are playing the role of a spokesperson in that sense. So there is in Harré's work what I call an alternative ontology for the social real that is quite fascinating and that needs to be further developed. Now, this brings me to the issue of the ontological grids. Mary, how much time do I still have? Because I don't keep track of time. Can I still go on?
Yes, you can. We have until 10:15, so we have 30 minutes left totally. So you have plenty of time, I think, to finish and still take questions after.
Okay, good.
So basically, you can use the 30 minutes however you would like.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So, speaking about these ontological grids, when we look at the world, we see around us a group of things, artifacts, that are causally interacting with each other. I can knock on my computer, nothing much happens, but this was a causal interaction between me and my computer. The things that we see around us are situated in physical space. My computer is here in front of me, and it's evolving in time. Because when I will leave the room later on today, I will take my PC with me to another place. It's simple as that. And that is what Harré calls the Newtonian in the Euclidean grid, a world where causes are deterministic. If I throw my computer on the ground, it probably will be damaged and I will not be able to use it. So causes are deterministic in the sense that it refers to the work of causality that was established by David Hume. And then on the other hand, we have space and time that are independent from each other. This has been the implicit metaphysics for lots of the social sciences and humanities for many decades, and that has been one of the great, let's say, realizations of Rom Harré together with Seckers and others to make sure that we realize that that is perhaps not the right way to think about psychology, about sociology. And here comes now the interesting thing. By now, we know that the Newtonian worldview does not hold at quantum level, neither does it at the level of the universe. So if that's the case, if there is only a limited area of, let's say, scale where Newtonian forces are applicable, then maybe we can see to what extent there are different grids needed for the social real. And this is now the point I want to make. Let's forget a moment about the social world and just focus upon the natural world, as the Italian physicist Rovelli did in his book, What is the World Made of? Here we have the basis. Newton says we have space, we have time, they are independent, and in that space we have substance, matter, which by now we know is not atoms but particles. Good. Then came some natural scientists like Faraday, who said, well, yes, space and time, but there is more under the sun, so to speak, than particles. We also have fields. Think of the electromagnetic field. Let's keep it like that. So we have fields that we have to take into account. Then came the genius of Einstein, who said, okay, particles and fields, But the relationship between space and time is much more complicated, or if you want, much more simple than what we usually were thinking in the Euclidean way. Space and time are not independent of each other. Actually, they are so related with each other, they are two sides of the same coin, that we can call them space-time. Then in a later publication, Einstein also developed the idea that space-time is actually just one specific type of field. So he ends up with this saying, there are two things in the universe that matter, that are fields and particles, and that's it. This is, of course, a summary of quantum physical thinking that is, as a summary, what it is. I know there's a much more complex reality behind it, but it allows you to see the evolution of thinking in terms of ontological grids. Now we can do the same thing for the social real. And first, we have the viewpoint of Rom Harré, who says, well, the equivalent of particles in the social world are speech acts, and speech acts has to be located in persons and conversations as two dimensions. Basically meaning that the speech act, and the one you see there, the question, what is the social real made of? It's not really that important to say that it has been uttered at this very moment here in Belgium, at this longitude, and et cetera, et cetera. What is important is who's saying that, who's asking that question. Is it me? Is it somebody else? And in what kind of conversation am I doing it? Suppose that we would be here gathering for watching together a football game, and one of you says, what is the social real made of? Then people say, what are you talking about? That's not fit. So it's only in certain conversations that you can have certain speech acts. This has been quite well developed by Rom and many others. Then one of the things Rom Harré started when he developed his notion of moral orders, and I continued with saying, yes, moral orders and also knowledge fields, is to say that, well, rather than having speech acts, and by the way, the things related, the secondary reality related to speech act, that is the act itself and the artifacts, that next to that, we also have to take into account fields, be it moral fields and normative fields and knowledge fields. And the next level is that you can say, well, basically we have the persons on the one hand, and if you take up conversations, the fields, the acts, the artifacts, the speech acts, all of that together is society. And then the next step is, if you are inspired by the work in the natural sciences, the next step would be to say, well, maybe we have to think of persons and societies as not independent and not independent of each other, and as two sides of the same coin. And so that's how we come to person society, which is a neologism that I invented. I'm not particularly happy with it, and I'm still looking for a better thing to call it than person society, but you understand it's a reference to the shift between the shift between Newtonian thinking and the Einsteinian thinking. So I'm going back. That person society as a kind of conceptual element can be localized at 4 distinct areas, conceptual areas. They are defined by 2 axes. The one is between public and private, and the other one between individual and collective, which is borrowed from Vygotsky, and that is also, again, something that we can find in Rom Harré's work, the idea that Vygotsky not only developed a very interesting scheme of how skills and knowledge develops in young people, but actually that he, by doing that, presented also a model for thinking about, basically about everything that touches upon psychological and social reality. So At the end of the day, then, the question is not what is society, but where is society? And my take, based upon Vygotsky, is that we can conceptualize society in 4 different realms. The first one is what we call public collective. That is everything that is out there on the internet, in books, in the artifacts, the signposts I see, everything that surrounds us in our human world. From that, we can appropriate some things. We can say, okay, there is some knowledge about, let's say, Rom Harré on the internet. There are some books that I can buy. I will appropriate those books, I will read them, and I will come to my own, let's say, my own representation of the work of Rom Harré. Once I have that representation, I can talk about it to other people. And I can see, as I'm doing right now, I can publish, so to speak, my individual thinking, my individual ideas about Rom Harré's work to a certain public. So this is done through conversations, through actions. And then, of course, there is also the private individual thing, that is the agency. That are the things that are not visible to the rest of the world, but that are a reality for me. I'm creating my own world by saying, I want to be a scholar in social sciences. I want to be somebody who helps in disseminating the legacy of Rom Harré, stuff like that. So the point is, at the end of the day, person and society are interlinked, but they have 4 manifestations. Society manifests itself as a culture that is made up of contributions of single persons, of course. 2, as a worldwide and species-long web of conversations between persons, as an appropriated subset of culture by a person, and then as a set of persons' worldviews, intentions, and actions. Now, this is another way of representing this. And this is a slide that brings together what I've been talking about the last couple of minutes. The person-society realm, with its organizations, is a reality because it's needed for people to appropriate external information to survive. Basically, that means that most of the information that we need to live our lives is definitely not available in the genetic material that we carry with us. With quite a lot of animals, that's just the opposite. Everything they need to know to survive is available in the genetic information. What is not in the genetic information of a human being is to be somewhere else, and that somewhere else is indeed that public collective realm where things, the culture as we can call it. This means in turn that we need to collaborate with strangers, and that we need to work with a system that allows people to do things. And here we come to the link with positioning theory, that the transfer of knowledge is partly related to the issue of we as human beings make it possible for people to do things for us. When I make an arrangement with a scholar to publish something together, that actually means that I'm imposing something upon another. So, will you be my co-author and do things with me? And at the same time, that happens in the other direction as well. When he says, yes, I'm also engaged in writing my part of the joint publication, etc., etc. So this brings me to model orders that are a very important aspect of positioning theory. And the positions that we are talking about are always to be seen as positions as model positions, or positions in a model field, if you want. This then has been further conceptualized by Rom Harré by introducing lots of other concepts such as episodes, icons, the social world, etc., etc. All of that is then indeed giving us a whole specific language that can be used to to talk about social reality. But what we still need is a model of societal change. And I think I better go very quickly about this. I'm going to skip some emails, some PowerPoints, and just say that what is, I think, possible is to use a model of biological evolution as a way to think about how the social world is organized. And that is related to what that famous psychologist Muddy in the 70s described when he wanted to compare personality theories to say, well, each of the theories is a kind of model of reality. There are some hidden mechanisms that you don't see, and he calls it the core tendencies, the drivers of the whole evolution, and the core characteristics, how the personality or the brain, if you want, is organized. And then you have some observable phenomena, for instance, that you have different personality types. That is what he calls the periphery. And then the link between the core and periphery is the phylogenesis. It's the classical biological model, which is obviously debatable. Now, the point is that he applied it, for instance, to personality theories like the one advanced by Sigmund Freud, where he said, okay, the core tendencies are the eros and the thanatos, the core characteristics, the ego, the superego, and the id. I guess most of you are very familiar with all that. The periphery is in the different characters that are linked to the evolution of the development evolution of persons. And so what he did for Freud's theory, he also did for other theories. And in that sense, I was thinking, well, because I see now that personality and society are somehow two sides of the same coin, maybe we can do the same for Rom Harré's thinking and try also to formulate it as a kind of muddy way of arranging the different elements of a theory. So the question would then be, what are the core tendencies of society? What is driving society? Well, here is my take, and I'm open to criticism and to suggestions on this. But at this moment, I think society is actually responsible for two things. First of all, it is a mechanism that pushes us towards agency, that enables people in their life to have as much as possible agency, because we need that kind of agency to live our lives, to advance things, to be social, to create new things and stuff like that. But on the other hand, agency should also somehow be contained, because if the agency of everybody goes in all kinds of directions, then there will be clashes. So you need mechanisms to steer that agency, to contain it. And I think both of them, the enabling and the containing personal agency, can be regarded as the two basic elements that drive society. If you think about it at the level of persons, then I think it's very simple that the tendency, the basic tendency of what we are doing is that we see from the moment we wake up in the morning until we go to sleep, we are confronted with what I call problems. That problem can be straightforward, down to earth, like the first thing you do in the morning, you brush your teeth. That's a problem in the sense that you need to have a teeth brush, you need to have dental pasta, you need to have water to clean your mouth, and etc., etc. And we know how to do that. And then we say in the morning, well, it's going to be cold outside, so I better put on some clothes. And that's it. But the point is now that coping with situations as problems is not the only thing that matters. There is also the fact that we use situations and the problems we encountered with as ways for expressing our identity. When I say in the morning, I'm going to put up some clothes because it's cold, obviously, but that's not the only reason why I have this shirt, why maybe I will later on today wear a tie when I go out for dinner, and things like that. It's also a way of expressing my identity. And this is something that was stressed by Rom Harré many times. It is that we actually live in two kinds of world orders. The one is focused upon the practical things about advancing issues that solve problems, and the other one is on the way of expressing our identities. So very quickly, the core characteristics of both societies can then be seen as the four spaces I already mentioned. The periphery is what I also already mentioned, the artifacts, the conversations, the fields, and the persons. So it is possible to reformulate a lot of Harré-inspired thinking on social theory with that scheme, which then, of course, would be very interesting to do. The next step is to see if you can rearrange, I say, Giddens thinking, Habermas thinking with the same conceptual scheme as well, and then make sure that we can have these theories talk to each other. So finally, and I will end here, what has all this to do with positioning theory? Well, I think the key is to understand that in that flow of conversations that we are engaged with from the beginning of our lives until we die, and even afterwards, people will hopefully talk a little bit about us from time to time, that string of conversations can be arranged in episodes. And with each episode, you have a position. The position changes if the episode changes. And what we can do now is see for each episode what kind of stock of knowledge there is available and what kind of moral order there is available. And that brings you directly to the heart of the story that I've been telling so far. That is that we can localize person society in these four quadrants, or Vygotsky quadrants, and the same can be done with positions. So you have a stock of positions that are available in culture in general. There are some of them that we appropriate and that we take as our own. We can imagine other or new positions because we have agency, and whatever we imagine or what we have appropriated can be expressed in conversations. And the drivers of positioning then can be seen on the one hand as societal drivers. They contain or stimulate agency. And on the other hand, we can think of them as problem-solving problems or issues that express our positions, that express our identity. So with this, I would like to end. Thank you very much for enduring me. And well, I would say the floor is open for questions and critical remarks and comments. By all means, let's go.
Thank you, Luke. And maybe you could probably stop sharing your screen, and that way, if you would like to see people, you can maybe see people.
I'm working on that.
Yeah, I can still see your screen. I might be able to remove it. While Lucas, while we're doing that, does anyone have a question that they would like to ask? You can put your questions in the chat. You can unmute and just ask your question. You can also use the reactions to raise a digital hand, or you can raise a physical hand if you have your camera on. I have a question. So maybe while you're thinking of yours, Luke, I'll ask this one. If you're thinking, if we're thinking about either expanding positioning theory or developing theories pertaining to social sciences and humanities work, we have a lot of folks who have been attending our talks who come from a wide array of disciplines. So they're folks coming from psychology or from linguistics or from applied fields like education or healthcare. So what role does cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary work play in the vision that you have and what you've been talking about today?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I would say that the main issue that I would hope that we can establish is that we can have the same conceptual framework that can be applied to the different disciplines. So, because that would really help social sciences a lot if we can have the same language that we use in, let's say, healthcare oriented research, in economic research, political sciences, because now each of these disciplines have their own vocabulary, their own concepts, their own little theories, and what we need is to bring them all together, I think.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Judith has yeah.
Go ahead, Judith.
I'm excited. This was really a tremendous anchor for a conversation across disciplines, which is something that some of us in the field of education research have begun to do in different ways. But you give us an anchor on which to add to and contrast. So thank you very much. That was very powerful. I think the slides provide a deep anchor. I'm wondering whether transdisciplinary becomes a new concept, not just interdisciplinary.
But thank you for the flattering words. Well, yes, to the extent that interdisciplinary leaves the disciplines for what they are and say we have to make sure that there are connections between them, that's something else than the way I understand transdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary is actually getting rid of the disciplines, disciplinary boundaries. I'm not quite sure what my position is in this one. On the one hand, I'm a big believer and defender of the idea that we should go for one social science that has the different transdisciplinary, if you want, perspectives. On the other hand, I realize that's probably, it's too late to do that now, because we have firmly institutionalized psychology, anthropology, political science, law as separate disciplines with its core identity. So I think we should go to the transdisciplinary, but probably from a realpolitik point of view, we will have to continue on an interdisciplinary. Maybe not a very satisfying answer, but
No,
I haven't made up my mind on this.
it is, and I've been following the Swiss Academy of Arts and Sciences, which has been building a model within their institutions, and they have what they call transdisciplinary net, TDNet. And it's raising a lot of the questions of how to break the silos, but how to rebuild toward a new way of understanding. I understand they're using this, at least in the sciences and others, to reformulate some of the Swiss universities.
Interesting. I'll take a note of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. I thought I saw somebody's hand up earlier. Did somebody else have another question? Asma?
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Professor Langenhove, for a good presentation and an important discussion. I have a question that how do you see the relationship between this language and conversation? Because first I got an impression that maybe language is different from conversation, but when you elaborated about, okay, the conversation is also, you include different signs, so it could give a different variety of conversation, which this theory talks about. But how do you see the relationship between, let's say, conversation or language and the cultural context, because somehow language is embedded in the cultural context or in different context, and this also gives a kind of different or variety, a difference or variety to the conversation or the language. Or my next question is also that can we use synonymously the language with conversation and communication? Is it all the thing that we are talking about here? Or is there any difference what you see between the conversation or communication or the language? I hope you understand my question.
Thank you very much, Asma. Good to see you again. Well, language conversation, obviously, there is some kind of language always involved in a conversation. The most obvious one is the spoken language in a face-to-face conversation or even an internet conversation that we have right now. But the point I think that we want to make is to say that it's not written language that should be the model of the analysis. The model of the analysis is the way we have a conversation, which means that you can only be a speaker if there is a listener. That's the difference with sending out a message in communication terms. You have the sender and the receiver. So I can post something on the internet. Then the internet is the receiver, and it can stay there for years. And somebody then would open my post, and that receiver then becomes a person. So the communication flow is not the conversation. Conversation is when there are people on both sides of the end, as in a sender and a receiver. But it's one of the topics that I really think that should be further clarified. That is the sharp distinction to be made between the oral culture of language and the written language. I know that some people in psycholinguistics have been working on that. By the way, there is a book by Mulhauser and Harré itself on psycholinguistics. And of course, when you mention the context, well, that is exactly what positioning theory tries to do. And that is to say that every part of a conversation, every speech act, every speech act has to be situated in the storyline that is developing. Otherwise, it becomes impossible to understand it. You have to link it to the storyline as context, and you have to link it to the powers, the positions that people take when they speak and when they are silent. Thank you. Anybody else? As you can see, the sun has started to shine here in Belgium. Which means I'm hinting that I would like to go to a terrace, but
I think Judith has a hand up again.
Yeah,
please, Judith, go ahead.
I guess what I'd like to do is invite a conversation into the work of interactional sociolinguistics in sociolinguistic work that Gumpers and Himes and others have done, which I think complements and extends and builds on what Asma just said and asked. It builds a whole framework for how to think about, adhere, interpret the complexities of the discourse in use.
Okay, can you repeat the name of those scholars?
John Gumpers. There's a whole, it's sociolinguistics, but there's a whole area of pragmatics that has built on this. I'm happy to share an early book that I just got the copyright on ethnography and language, which was done in 1981. That is now open access. It's a conversation across different disciplines about some of these questions that Asma asked, but in educational context and how to study the education in use. There's a special issue of linguistics and education in 2000 that looks at different traditions that have taken some of these kinds of work. It's volume 5, numbers 3 and 4, if you're interested in looking at that.
Absolutely.
But it ties, and I'm so excited because you've laid out a way of having the conversations
Mhm.
across and within and between and among. I don't know
Yes.
what the words are.
The thing is that your remarks pointed me to something that I should have stressed. This, I also believe that at the end of the day, it becomes less and less possible for one author or one scholar to be the author of a social theory. I think we need to bring people together and work as a group, because there's so many different strands of literature. And by the way, the amount of things that are published is going still exponentially, becoming more and more. And I mean, just look at what's happening now with our Chinese colleagues. More and more people start to publish in English, or we can have translation machines and algorithms that help us to understand what people in China or in India, whatever, are saying. This is going to change the whole landscape of social sciences and sciences in general, by the way, tremendously. And the amount of things that are done by so many social scientists on the one hand, and the amount of things that are the result of what I call the datification of the world is on the one hand making it more difficult to come to people who have this one person set of insights about how the world looks like. But on the other hand, we need more and more that kind of things. So basically what I'm saying is that the next well-written and with social theory with generative power, with power to change things, shall not be written by one person, but by a group of persons.
I will agree, because half the work I do, 90% of the work I do, or maybe 98, is always in teams across disciplines, because I learned very early that I don't know the science when I'm looking at science, but my colleague does. And so as we collaborate and work together, oh, I hate that word. As we engage with each other, we begin to see what we can and cannot say in our own disciplines.
Thank you, Judith and Luke. I think these are really interesting conversations, and that's part of why we want to continue our series next year. We're a little bit past our scheduled time, and I know that some folks may have places to go. So we appreciate your staying on, and Luke for taking this extra time with us too. But I think what this conversation really points to is that there's so much yet here to continue to talk about. And really, we've just this year in this series dipped a toe in the pond. There's just so much more to explore. And we will continue those conversations this summer in the Positioning Theory Conference. We will continue them next year as well in the virtual talk series. So please continue to stay posted. If anybody has suggestions for things they'd like to see us try to find, somebody to talk about, feel free to reach out and suggest those too. So thank you so much, Luke, for presenting and sharing your ideas with us today, and for everybody for your attendance.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, and I hope to